So the following is an excerpt from a video I recently did on the subject of the current state of democracy in the West, that I felt might be better served as a separate video for all of those interested, as I personally find myself to be quite sick and tired of hearing from the right that the far left is not politically oppressed within a democracy, and just as equally if not more so appalled by the fact that those of the left seem to struggle to explain the source of their feelings of oppression. As to me, even a casual glance at any political bell curve graph should give one a very clear idea of who is being politically oppressed under a single vessel majority rule governmental template, and ultimately, why. Well, here we have before us our political desire bell curve graph once again, except this time I have set it up to ask and answer a simple question for us. That being, what would such a political spectrum graph look like under a single vessel Western democratic template if one was to also track feelings of tyranny, to say nothing of outright objective tyranny, due to the nature and limitations of the Western democratic system by design? In other words, we are basically just attempting to measure how close our current democratic system comes to achieving the desired political state of each individually desiring political group within a democracy, with the results of such being as shown here. And thus we have highlighted in full and can suddenly see very clearly the true nature and limitations of a single vessel democratic template, as it becomes very evident when we track such metrics that the closer one's political desires lean towards the political median in a democracy, aka the current center, the closer one is towards achieving and ultimately living in their desired political state at any given point in time in a democracy, as democratic genius governments always cater best towards the bulk of politically desiring humanity. However, the farther one goes towards the extremes in the political desiring spectrum, the farther away the political ship of state almost always is from achieving the desired political state of said political minority groups. And thus, the ever more tyrannical such a political system that generates this state of affairs will not only feel, but simply objectively will be, to said political minority group living in a democracy. Now, to be clear, while we all feel in a democracy at times as though we live in a world that does not support us politically, aka that we work and pay taxes in support of a political system and a political state that is not our own and does not support our political desires, those on the far and radical right and left and other political minority groups, such as the classic libertarians, for example, don't just feel but actually do live in a world of systematic tyranny and oppression via governance by majority rule, aka democracy. Add in the simple fact that this very system of government that oppresses political minority groups just so happens to have been created by a bunch of white Caucasian males and is championed by the Western world, which also just so happens to historically be white and male-dominated, and it suddenly becomes rather clear as to exactly why those on the far left all too often decry that they are being systematically oppressed by the white male patriarchy, democracy, and the Western world in general, which typically under any other circumstances would just sound ridiculous to us, but if you actually math it out, they are actually kind of correct. Now, just to be clear here, I am by no means attempting to defend the current political actions of the far left, as they are quite simply objectively immoral. However, what I am simply attempting to point out is that when someone here on the political spectrum says that they are being oppressed and tyrannized by democracy, they are in fact correct, at least as far as their political will is concerned, but not so much as far as their basic human rights are concerned. Now, just to be extra thorough for those who don't know, democracy was never intentionally designed to oppress the minority, but was in point and fact designed to oppress the majority in favor of the protection of the minority, the design structure of which you can see clearly in democracy's need for a perpetuated supermajority well in the excess of a 51% majority rule, both to enact and maintain any significant protocol within the confines of a democratic system, with the general democratic governance rule being 60% to enact and 70 to 75% to maintain over time. With the irony here being that the fundamental design of democracy, the very thing that makes an inherent unstable system stable, the literal ballast of the democratic ship of state, being the same source cause for the reason that the political minority groups within a democracy having little to no chance of ever seeing their desired political state being made a reality within a democracy. Furthermore, is ultimately the history of it all, as prior to democracy's stable manifestation, all other governmental types, it could be said, oppressed 80% of the population's political will to advance 20% of the population's political will. But then along comes viable democracy and essentially flips those numbers around, to 20% of the population's political will being oppressed, or more accurately sacrificed, as the oppression was not intentional but definitely known at the time, to better achieve the desired political state of the remaining 80% of humanity. Now, all told, this is a massive net gain and ultimately a huge advancement for humanity. But ultimately, here's the problem. If you could track political desired metrics of who gained and who lost in this political shift from monarchies, oligarchies, theocracies, and aristocracies, ultimately to a democracy, to literally track political will denial shifts from one age to another, then it becomes very clear that not only has nothing changed for the far left over time, but that they historically have arguably been the biggest losers over time. The point here being ultimately that when people here on the political spectrum cast their eye at Western political history from their own lens and see oppression, they ultimately are kind of right to do so. What I just wanted to point out here was that this systematic tyranny of either the far left or the far right was never intentional on our end, aka the political designer's side of this outcome. And in fact, we have been working rather ceaselessly looking for a solution to this problem that is universally known to us as the problem of the political body. With the best known solution to this issue of democracy, aka the distinctified multi-vessel theory, being findable likewise here on this channel. As always, this has been Philosopher 215, hoping for you all the very best.